Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify or wherever you listen. It's Monday, the 2nd of December here in London. I'm Caroline Hepke. Coming up today, President Joe Biden pardons his son Hunter after repeatedly insisting he wouldn't, just weeks before leaving office. France's Finance Minister tells Bloomberg that the government won't be blackmailed over the budget by Marine Le Pen. Plus, workers across Europe are taking more sick days and the economic costs are mounting. But does anyone have an antidote? Let's start with a roundup of our top stories. President Joe Biden has signed a sweeping pardon for his son Hunter. The move reverses the president's previous commitment not to use his executive powers to aid his son. In a statement, Biden justified the pardon by saying that the case against his son was politically motivated and designed to break him and Hunter. We get reaction now from the former federal prosecutor Laurie Levenson.
I think everyone needs to recognize that with the broad power that presidents have to issue pardons, they will use them for family members and they will use them for close friends because the Constitution gives them this broad pardon power.
That was Professor of Law Laurie Levenson. Biden's move marks a stunning decision by an outgoing president weeks before he leaves office and President-elect Donald Trump takes power. Hunter Biden was found guilty of gun charges by a federal court in Delaware earlier this year. His sentencing in that case was set to take place next Thursday. He pled guilty in a separate felony tax case in September and overall faced the threat of significant time in prison. France's finance minister says that the country won't be blackmailed on the budget. Speaking to Bloomberg over the weekend, Antoine Armand explained that the government won't accept artificial deadlines from the national rally's Marine Le Pen. That's even as the far-right politician gave her strongest indication yet that she is prepared to topple the government by backing a no-confidence motion.
The French government doesn't take ultimatums. It's looking at the French parliamentary debate. It's respecting each and every parliamentary debate that leads to an evolution. We will take into account what is changing, but we won't be blackmailed. We are committed to reduce the deficit.
French Finance Minister Antoine Armand speaking there. The country's political standoff has led to market jitters, with the euro slipping about 0.4% in early Asia trading today as investors reacted to Armand's comments. Business activity here in the UK is on course to shrink for the first time in more than 2 years. That's according to the Confederation of British Industry's monthly growth indicator. The employer group's survey found that the budget measures, including a £26 billion increase to payroll taxes, have hit business sentiment, with firms warning that it will undermine economic growth and employment. The findings come as the Prime Minister Keir Starmer is expected to unveil a plan for change, including targets for the economy, healthcare and crime this week, as he faces plummeting poll ratings. Ireland is likely to see the return of a coalition government led by Fianna Gael and Fianna Fáil, with more than two-thirds of the election results announced. The two parties are on track to get more than 80 seats. They need 88 for a majority in the Irish Parliament. A deal with a smaller party or independent lawmakers would likely get them over the line. Here's the Fianna Gael leader and Prime Minister Simon Harris.
It was predicted by many that my party would lose dozens and dozens of council seats, maybe up to 60 council seats. Didn't happen. It was predicted we'd be lucky if we returned with 2 MEPs. Didn't happen. More people voted Fine Gael in the local elections than any other party.
While Harris's Fianna Gael had a significant poll lead ahead of the vote, a gaffe-ridden campaign saw his party's lead evaporate ahead of the election, with Fianna Fáil, led by Micheál Martin, potentially gaining the upper hand in coalition talks. Syrian government forces have withdrawn from the city of Aleppo following an offensive by rebels opposed to the rule of President Assad. It marks the most significant fighting in Syria's civil war in recent years. Dr. Haid is a senior consulting research fellow at Chatham House.
What we have seen in the past 24 to 48 hours is that regime forces as well as allies have been mobilizing themselves in order to go and then fight back. And I think the upcoming few days will really give us a better sense of how secure the regime is.
Dr. Haid speaking there as rebel forces push south towards Hama. President Assad's two biggest military allies, Russia and Iran, have reiterated their support for the Syrian regime. However, events in Ukraine and the Middle East mean that both nations may only offer limited support. And lastly, Stellantis CEO Carlos Tavares is stepping down following a dispute with the board over how to improve the company's sagging fortunes. Tavares is one of a number of industry executives who've come under pressure as the car maker confronts a slumping market. Global automakers are struggling with an economic slowdown in China, flagging demand for electric vehicles here in Europe, and the threat of tariffs from President-elect Donald Trump in the US. The firm behind brands including Jeep and Fiat says that the company will now be led by an interim committee headed by the chairman, John Elkann, and the new CEO will be named in the first half of 2025. So those are a few of our top stories then for you this morning. In terms of the markets this hour, S&P 500 E-mini futures are down this morning 0.2%. US Stocks 50 futures are also slumping 0.9%, although we do see some stocks rising in Asia. The MSCI Asia Pacific Index up by 0.6%. We saw some gains on Wall Street on Friday. I think the big moves, though, have been in the currency markets. The dollar is rallying. We're up almost 0.5% on the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index. President-elect Trump demanded commitment from BRICS countries on continuing to use the US dollar, telling them not to create a currency to rival the greenback. That seems to have injected some movement in the FX space, seems to be a bearish signal for the yuan, for example. But you've also got the French budget standoff, which has weighed on risk sentiment. It's also weighed significantly on the euro, which is slumping this morning, down 0.5%. 10-year US Treasury yields have added 4 basis points to 4.21. And we're also gearing up, of course, for the December central bank meetings. Rate hike fever has also powered the Japanese yen. It's slumping now 0.5% against the US dollar this morning. In a moment, we'll bring you more on Biden pardoning his son, Hunter Biden, and the reaction, plus our exclusive interview with the French Finance Minister Antoine Armand, and a story about the growing toll of sick days in Europe. But another story caught my eye this morning. Bloomberg's Josie Cox got me thinking about AI, artificial intelligence. I wonder if you're using it daily, weekly, not at all? Well, over the last 6 months, Josie's been asking people about AI and how they use it, and digging up all of the research into how different genders are using artificial intelligence. She says that there is a worrying generative AI gender gap, with more men likely to use AI tools like ChatGPT and women more hesitant. There is obviously a well-known kind of tech gender divide, but she's more worried about the AI gap because of how quickly AI is reshaping and transforming the labour market. So she looked at some of there aren't that many surveys, but she did look at the surveys that exist of AI, including from the Bank for International Settlements in July, talking about this statistically significant gender AI gap. But the piece that she writes isn't all negative, so I want to end on a kind of hopeful note. She says that actually at the end of November, Deloitte published a separate survey and found that the number of US women using or experimenting with generative AI has tripled in 2024 compared to men who are using it now 2.2 times more than they were previously. So that actually helped to narrow the gender gap on artificial intelligence. It's one of the stories I'm recommending to you on the Bloomberg Terminal and on the website today. It's by Bloomberg's Josie Cox. Right, let's get to the main story this morning. President Joe Biden repeatedly has said that he would not interfere with prosecutions against his son. But on Sunday, he signed a sweeping pardon for Hunter Biden. Joining us now is Bloomberg senior editor Bill Ferries. Bill, good morning and welcome to the programme. Biden argues that Hunter was singled out and unfairly prosecuted. What does this pardon mean for Hunter Biden?
Well, I think for Hunter Biden, this really wipes the slate clean. President Joe Biden's his statement basically said for a 10-year period from I think starting in 2014 all the way forward that anything that Hunter Biden anything against the United States that he had been involved in or may have been involved in, he is essentially pardoned for. So it wipes the slate clean, but it's one of these issues, frankly, that has dogged President Biden for years now inquiries into Hunter Biden. He's faced some very political accusations, and he's faced federal charges that he's pled guilty to at some point. So it kind of ends that chapter, but I think there will also be questions about whether it does stain Joe Biden's legacy a little bit, because he had insisted for so long that he would never take this step.
Well, Trump and Republicans were quick to respond. President-elect Trump calling it a miscarriage of justice.
Yeah, President-elect Trump really kind of has focused personally on Hunter Biden. Even after Joe Biden was out of the race, President-elect Trump was saying, "Where is Hunter Biden?" It was really, I think, a successful campaign tactic for Donald Trump to use. And you've had other Republicans saying that the sweeping nature of the pardon, which basically says, the things we knew about and potentially things that we don't know about, whether they exist or not, he's pardoned for. So it made some Republicans question whether there were other things out there in Hunter Biden's past that could have been investigated. You also have Democrats, frankly, saying that, Joe Biden has really been someone who's talked about standing up for institutions, that some Democrats saying, listen, this is not how you really want to end your presidency, even though I think a lot of people understand, listen, it's his son. But if you put, we had one Democrat saying he's put his family above country in this case. So I think there's actually going to be some bipartisan criticism that this is one of the things that will define President Joe Biden's final weeks in office.
Yeah, just lastly, what does it mean then for the power of the presidential pardon? We're going to see it wielded more.
Well, I think, the one thing that this move by Joe Biden does is in some ways it may validate Donald Trump's accusations that the justice system is politicized. I mean, that was basically what Joe Biden said in his pardon announcement, that there are aspects of this case that were infected by politics. I think Donald Trump can embrace that idea as well and say that the prosecutions he's faced have been politically motivated, and I would expect to hear that going forward.
OK, Bill, thank you so much for being with me this morning. Bloomberg's senior editor, Bill Ferries. Yes, already lots being written about Biden, President Joe Biden pardoning his son, Hunter Biden. The French Finance Minister Antoine Armand says that the government won't accept ultimatums from Marine Le Pen over a new budget law, even as the far-right leader gave her strongest indications yet that she will topple the administration as soon as this week. Of course, her party in Parliament has the largest number of seats. Antoine Armand has been speaking to Bloomberg's Caroline Conan in Paris.
Let us be very clear. France is on the right track. France's economy has got very solid arguments, and it needs to be repeated. First of all, as you know, we expect a growth of 1.1% in 2034. It will be above the Eurozone average. Second, we have an inflation under the 2%, which is now stable. And third of all, needs to be said, we have an unemployment which is at its lowest in 40 years in France. So we have a strong economy, we have solid arguments. And last but not least, we have a clear perspective. Our government, Michel Barnier's government, has a clear commitment to reduce the deficit. It will be done. It needs to be done.
It needs to be done, but it's getting very difficult this week because obviously your government faces a possible motion of no confidence and could collapse as soon as this week. Michel Barnier, the Prime Minister, has already made some concessions, including on prices of electricity. What other concessions are you ready to make? Are you ready to tell us today in order for Marine Le Pen from the National Rally to abstain from a vote of no confidence?
You're right to remind that my Prime Minister, Michel Barnier, is a man of dialogue and compromise. And this government, in the last week, has clearly demonstrated its willingness to ensure that France could have a budget through evolution in the budget. And let me remind also that the parliamentary debate is still ongoing, and we have to wait until the end of this debate. But as you said, France is at a critical time. We have the arguments. We have the fundamentals. We have a perspective to reduce public spending and to cut borrowing, which is very important for France, but for Europe as well. So let's remind the political leaders in France that we have a common responsibility, and that this common responsibility includes voting, adopting, passing a budget.
Does that mean there's going to be more compromise, more concessions before Monday night, which is the deadline that Marine Le Pen has given you?
As I said, the French government doesn't take ultimatums. It's looking at the French parliamentary debate. It's respecting each and every parliamentary debate that leads to an evolution. We will take into account what is changing, but we won't be blackmailed. We are committed to reduce the deficit.
I understand you're willing to perhaps compromise, but Marine Le Pen has some specific concessions she wants from the government, including that all pensions be indexed on inflation as soon as January. And she also wants the government to give up this plan to abandon some drug reimbursement. On these two specific topics, is there any way to have more concessions from the government?
Let us not just focus on the Rassemblement National, because as you know...
but it's key.
It's key, but it's not enough. And as you say, for a vote of confidence to be adopted at the French Parliament, you would need to have the Socialist Party, the left parties, to vote with the far-right parties. So it would not only be the responsibility of Marine Le Pen's party, it would also be the responsibility of French socialists, French ecologists, people who are willing to oppose to Marine Le Pen, to vote together. It would be a very bad signal politically and economically for these countries, for our country, and for these parties who are saying and claiming that they could stay government parties.
Does that mean you're trying to negotiate with the Socialist Party, not the National Rally?
No, we are not focused on with whom we negotiate or not. As I said, the government is a government of dialogue, of respect, of co-construction. This budget has been co-constructed. It's not the result of just a government project. It's evolving within the days and the weeks of the parliamentary debate. We'll still be open, but not to blackmail.
You're not open to blackmail, but the thing that Marine Le Pen wants really is for the government to respect, that's what she says, to respect the electorate of the National Rally. Are you willing to say that the concessions you've already made, for example, are thanks to the National Rally and that you respect her electorate?
We respect each and every MP, and we respect each and every people in France, whatever they decided to vote or not to vote, of course. But what's my responsibility as a finance minister is to commit to the 5% target that we decided to have at the beginning of our mandate, not only for France or for the government, because it's now needed in order that Europe still remain a country, a continent of prosperity. That's what we aim at. And for that, we need all political leaders to be responsible.
With these concessions that we've seen in the budget, they're going to cost about 10 billion euros. Does that mean you can actually keep this 5% deficit target? Or do you believe perhaps it will be slightly higher, like 5.5, or perhaps higher?
As I told you, our commitment to reduce the budget deficit towards 5% in 2025 and towards 3% in 2029 is not an option. It is something we are very carefully looking at. What does that mean?
But can you actually fulfill this?
Yes, it means that at every time that we made adjustments on our budget, we compensated it with saving, with new measures. It's clearly an important point to underline here. We are committed to this 5% target in 2025.
That was France's Finance Minister Antoine Armand speaking to our own Caroline Conant in Paris. And there were moves after that discussion. Of course, the euro this morning is currently down by 0.5% against the US dollar, and the tension really around the French budget continues to mount. Turning to a story in Europe, though, now. Businesses in Europe are struggling as more workers take sick days. Ageing workforces and more awareness of stress and mental health are partly to blame. But the solutions aren't that easy. Joining us now is Bloomberg's Nordics editor, Ott Umalas. Ott, good morning and welcome to the programme. You've written about how Norway is seeing a large number of sick days per worker. What does the data show?
In a lot of European nations, the media likes to refer to those countries as the sick man of Europe, but at least according to the OECD, both in terms of public spending on health-related benefits and in terms of average sick leave days, Norway is the worst in the rankings. And what the international organizations, not just OECD, have been saying, this largely comes down to very generous sick absence benefits. So in Norway, they are at 100% of the worker's wage for the duration of 12 months. And therefore, those organizations have urged the Norwegian authorities to curb those benefits.
So then, what are the solutions then? Is it that cutback? Surely that's not going to be very popular. And does it mean kind of presenteeism being enforced at work?
Well, indeed, presenteeism is not the way that the experts are recommending. In fact, OECD data says that in terms of productivity, presenteeism would be 2 to 3 times worse for productivity than being actually absent. But what the experts are saying at OECD, they say the public policy choices do actually matter, and the biggest policy issue across the rich world is the lack of early intervention. So basically, it is almost too late to look at someone's long-term outlook when absence is more than 6 months, because by that time, they are already more likely to not return to the labor market. And then the research cites Netherlands as one of the best examples in taking smart solutions, because the Netherlands used to be the sick man of Europe before Norway, but what they did was they shifted responsibility for the system from the state to employers, at least to a degree that no other country did, and that's brought some success at least.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.